In this video, I will teach you how I bought my 86-year-old abandoned house here in central Tokyo. I'll also share some tips and tricks that would have been very helpful for me, myself, if I knew these things about a year ago when I started this renovation journey. Konnichiwa minasan, Anton in Japan here, and welcome to Tokyo. As I told you in the intro, I wanted to share my story about how I bought this empty Akiya here in central Tokyo. 86 years old, abandoned for 10 years. Abandoned sounds rough, but it was empty for over 10 years. And this is my story about how I bought it. Before you're thinking about buying one of these or getting one of these houses for almost nothing, I think you should understand Japanese culture and language Japanese eventually, and also how the Japanese real estate market works. Because if you don't, you might end up in a lot of trouble later on. So in Europe or America, for example, the real estate market is just going up, up, up. Maybe not this year, but in the big picture, real estate prices historically goes up. But in Japan, it kind of decreases. It doesn't really hold any value in real estate itself. But the land holds value, especially if the location is good. So you probably know that Japan has a declining population. And as I've explained in my first ever YouTube video on this channel, Anton in Japan, Japan has over 9 million abandoned houses all over Japan. But they're not only on the countryside, they're in Tokyo, Osaka, very central locations as well. So why are there so many abandoned houses? First of all, declining population, then taxes, and then also a culture here in Japan about old houses being torn down only after 35 years old. After this time span, the value of the house is basically zero, and the value holds in the land. So people tear 35-year-old houses down and then they build brand new, very prefabricated, and they don't really have the same renovation culture as in my country, in Sweden, for example. So this house was 86 years old, almost 2 or 3 times the average house here in Japan that's getting torn down and built brand new, right? Me, myself, I grew up with my younger sisters and my parents in a suburb of Stockholm. That house was built in 1909. It was in a terrible shape in 1995 when my parents bought it. And if they wouldn't have maintained it, they probably would have torn it down and built a brand new one. But that's a different story. So in Japan, the value of real estate is usually within the land. And if there's an old building, the building itself isn't really worth anything. So you can buy a house for 0 yen. But then maybe the land will be worth a lot of money. It differs from cases to cases. You can also buy shakuchiken, where you rent the land from the owner or from the state. It's usually cheaper to buy a house like that because you don't own the land. Or you can buy it with a freehold compared to the leasehold, right? In my case, I bought a house that you cannot rebuild. So the road outside here is less than 2 meters, which makes it impossible to rebuild. Not impossible, but by Japanese law, you're not allowed to rebuild it. So you can only renovate it. Me, myself, I grew up in 114-year-old house. And basically all around me, my whole entire grown up, I had renovation around me. We also have woodworking classes in school and I enjoy working with my hands. So I knew this house was abandoned because I lived in the area and I knew one of the neighbors. So I asked her, do you know who lives or lived in this house? Because it's abandoned. And she gave me a contact to a very nice man called Douglas. He's Japanese. He lived about an hour away from this area where I bought the house. So Douglas contacted me and he knew about me because I was doing renovation on YouTube as well. So this very nice man, Douglas, asked me if I wanted to have a look inside of the house. I never knew how this house looked from the inside because it was basically an aluminum facade and I had no idea. I could only dream about how it looked from the inside. I've spent a year now almost every day in here, so now I'm very used to it. But at that time, I didn't know anything. So I met up with Douglas and his wife and they showed me the inside of the house. And it was full of stuff everywhere. So the house is very old. You cannot rebuild it. And that was the reason why it was abandoned for so long. Another reason is also the laws about trash disposal here in Japan. They got a quote apparently to just get rid of the trash, and it was about 15,000 American dollars to get rid of the trash here. Huge problem. It put me in a lot of trouble as well. I've told you this in another of my shorter videos. But for them, they didn't want to deal with this. This was their childhood home, a lot of memories, but they didn't think that anyone saw any value in this because it's just a different culture. Japanese culture likes brand new houses. Old houses doesn't really have value, but to me it had. And I was in for a challenge as well. So they showed me inside of the house. I had some free time. I looked around, looked for water leaks and for termites, just trying to estimate how much time, how much money I needed to spend here. I had no idea how much money they wanted, what the hardships of selling it was, buying it was. It was quite complicated for many different reasons. And pretty early in this scenario, I involved a broker friend of mine who does real estate. I studied this on the side, but I left it to a pro friend of mine who knows the market very, very well. And he said this property itself is very hard to buy because there are so many different regulations. So there were 3 siblings owning it together. So it was a lot of memories here for them. They grew up here and their parents, they passed away. They didn't pass away here, but it was still, all of their stuff was still here. Cost a lot of money to get rid of, and they didn't think anyone saw any value in this home. And they asked me, do you want to buy it? I immediately felt some good energy in here. And I felt that I can make this look very beautiful because it's a very huge space in Japanese standards. They had some beautiful Japanese tatami rooms on the 2nd floor, a very steep staircase that I rebuilt, you see behind me right here. And it was close to where I lived, so it would have been very easy to renovate this, right? And then the whole process started, and it took about a year. I needed to get some hanko, some inkan, certificates from over there, some certificates from there. It just took a lot of time, but eventually we agreed on a price, a very cheap price considering this is central Tokyo. And I got the keys to the house about a year later after meeting Douglas for the first time. I got it for a cheap price. I was able to get a loan despite being a foreigner. So the first thing I did when I got the keys to this house was to inspect. What did I really buy, you know? One of the reasons why I got it so cheap was because it was easy for them to sell. Anton's gonna take care of the trash. He has a real estate agent. He's gonna renovate this place beautifully. And that's better than just letting it fade away, right? Also the neighbors, they've thanked me 100 times. Like abandoned houses, especially in Tokyo. My house on the backside here is probably 20 centimeters away. Fire hazards in these houses are making people very worried. So my neighbors around me here, they're very grateful for me being here. I'm sorry for making a lot of noise at night sometimes, but I'm finally done here. Other ways of getting a hold of these Akiya is to go to the city hall. In Tokyo, they don't have too many Akiyas around, but if you go to Kanagawa, Chiba, Saitama, there are Akiya banks where all of these abandoned properties are listed usually. Also the Japanese real estate market, there's a lot of deals going on off market. So Sumo, Atto Home, there are a lot of pages for buying like Zillow in America or Hemnet in Sweden. But in Japan, there's a lot of things going on off market, and I really realized that by doing this. So what should you think of if you're thinking about buying an Akiya in Tokyo? First of all, I think the most important thing here is to understand the market and also Japanese culture. If you don't have these, I think you should study it before you're even considering it. Also, you should be very careful about taxes. So what was the first thing I did when getting this house? Clean it out after inspecting what I had. I didn't find any termites at first, but oh god, I did. They were crawling up the pillars and not funny. Yeah, I had a pillar here with really termite eaten, and yeah, I have my dining table here right now, so I had a pillar right there where I had termites just crawling up all the way to the ceiling actually. So I replaced the beams in the ceiling here, and I actually took away the pillar right there. By putting a beam there, I needed to add this pillar as well. I didn't do it on my own, but a great friend of mine, Kazuki-san, Japanese guy, Japanese carpenter who works with these beautiful miyadaiku kind of cuts. I learned a lot from him. He did the earthquake safety here. So cleaning out the house, check for water leaks, check for termites, check the foundation. I redid the entire foundation, pour a concrete slab under the entire house, earthquake safety, not easy at all. Got a lot of help with that, thank you a lot, Kaneko-san. And then I just started rebuilding and spent thousands of hours here. I spent a lot of money on the renovation after spending a lot of money on trash disposal and taking care of the trash. So let me know in the comments what you want to see next. I am happy to answer any questions in my next movie as well. I hope you learned something from this video, and please let me know if you want me to cover something else about Japan. See you very soon. Anton in Japan.